It's 8 o'clock in my watch, so we can start. Tova, just open your mic, please.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Tova Dorfman. I'm the chair of the Herzl Center. And I want to wish you good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever time zone you may be. We're thrilled to be here together with you from the Herzl Center in Jerusalem. We are joined by our partners, the American Zionist Movement and the Zionist Federation in the UK. This is a unique event in that we are commemorating 125 years to the publication of Theodor Benjamin Zev Herzl's The Jewish State. I now want to recognize some of our colleagues and friends from abroad. Itzhak Zunenschein, the World Zionist Organization's Shaliach in the UK, and Herbert Bloch, CEO of the American Zionist Movement. And we are also really honored to have Richard D. Heidemann, president of the AZM, with us. And I want to call upon Richard to bring some greetings. Richard?
Thank you very much, Tova. Thank you very much, Tova. It's a pleasure to be with everyone. The partnership between the American Zionist Movement and the World Zionist Organization and the Herzl Center is a very important one because we are one people. And let's remember that it was in 1897 that Theodor Herzl called together, brought together the Jewish people in Basel. And he set forth through his leadership a vision for a modern Jewish state. And today we're celebrating the reality of that state, the wonderful dynamic reality of that state. The fact that it's 125 years since his book that set forth his vision shows us how time runs so quickly, but it also shows us what can be accomplished with determination, with leadership, with vision, and with unity. And on behalf of all of the organizations of the American Zionist Movement, 33 organizations from across the spectrum of Jewish life in the United States, we applaud the Herzl Center for launching this important event and this year of milestones to recognize and celebrate 125 years of the launching of the vision of the Jewish state by Theodor Herzl. Thank you.
Tova, please open mic.
Thank you, Richard. We appreciate your partnership as well. And before we begin this evening's formal part of the program, I want to give a brief description of the revolutionary piece that we will be discussing tonight. On February 14, 1896, a small pamphlet with a yellow cover was published. Its title appeared in large letters, The Jewish State, a proposal of a modern solution for the Jewish question by Theodor Herzl, Doctorate of Law. The author's identity aroused curiosity, while the title of the book was astonishing. The author, Benjamin Zev Theodor Herzl, a well-known journalist and author whose articles were eagerly consumed in Viennese cafes, was also well known throughout the Austro-Hungarian Empire. However, he was not known as a man interested in the plight of the Jews, rather as a talented journalist and playwright. The fact that such a person would write a book about the problem of the Jews and offer a solution in such a blatant and unequivocal way, in two clear words, the Jewish state, placed the book at the center of public eye and debate. This is the only text in which Herzl used his academic degree, Doctorate of Law. He used it specifically to emphasize that here stands the academic, not the playwright, and the text is meant to be taken seriously. A year and a half after its publication, the first Zionist Congress was held, where they established the World Zionist Organization. Eventually, the Zionist movement culminated in the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, and therefore, this book is the basis on which the State of Israel was founded. Today was a particularly exciting day at the Herzl Center. We launched a social media campaign called #Medinat HaYehudim Sheli. That means #MyJewishState. And we asked public figures throughout Israel to give their perspective on Herzl's publication. And we received tens of responses, which you can view on our Facebook page and on our website. One of those responders were President Reuven Rivlin, who wrote this morning, and I will read a quote from him. Currently, the Jewish state is in a state of economic, social, and public health turmoil. However, we still cling to the Herzlian notion of biyachad, together, a dream based on the basic and brilliant value that has accompanied our people for centuries, the value of mutual responsibility. I believe with all my heart and soul that there is no challenge we cannot confront and overcome. If we learn, as we have already proven, to be capable of reaching out, to be there for each other, we can continue to breathe life into this dream, continue to fulfill the legend. Herzl's belief in the Jewish people, which of course gave rise to the state of Israel, is one from which we must learn and apply in our daily lives. We Herzl students know instinctively that nothing we want badly enough is impossible. We live in a country that by its very existence embodies the impossible, and we continue to realize this vision that many claimed was impossible. Armed with a firm belief that with an iron will and a clear vision, the desert can be transformed into a flourishing country and the small country into the nation of startups. That's by President Rivlin. And now to our panel of our distinguished speakers. Our first speaker tonight is Ophir Yarden. And Ophir, who is a good friend and a colleague, teaches at Brigham Young University's Jerusalem Center, has researched and written about Mount Herzl, and is the director of the Jerusalem Center for Interreligious Encounter. So Ophir, I'm passing over to you.
Thank you, Tova. And no. Okay. Thank you, Tova. So happy to be here.
Just before you begin, our speakers tonight, we're on a tight schedule, so I want to just make sure that we know you have about 8 to 10 minutes, but no more than 10 minutes. So we're going to keep close time and tab on you.
Okay. So because we have so little time, I've prepared a few slides so that we can go quickly. What I'd like to do in these few minutes is to say a few words about what Der Judenstaat is and how it came about, look a little at how it was received and appreciate its importance. And then I'll conclude with something of a flashback in which I'll try to place Herzl's thought in a historical context. So there was a context for Herzl's authoring this book. It wasn't the first thing he wrote that addressed the issues. In 1894, he wrote a play called The New Ghetto. It was written during and not because of the Dreyfus trial. It was set in Vienna, not in Paris. And in it, he addressed what he called the new ghetto because there was no longer the old ghetto, but Herzl felt that there were still restrictions and problems with Jews faced even 100 years after the emancipation. After penning The New Ghetto, Herzl continued to ponder these issues, and about 6 months later, in May of '95, he decided to write about them again, but this time as a manifesto, a political work, not a work of fiction or drama. The fiction would come later, of course. That would be Alte Neuland in 1902. And the book would eventually, of course, be the Der Judenstaat that Tova has mentioned. He worked on this for about 6 months, writing various drafts and improving his work in his diary. He met and became acquainted with many potential allies. Not everyone he met joined his idea, but some did. And then finally, in November of 1895, he had his first opportunity to publicly present his ideas when he was invited to the Anglo-Jewish Maccabean Society. As a result of that presentation, which was received in a lukewarm sort of way, the London Jewish Chronicle invited him to publish a précis of the upcoming book, and that took place in January of 1896. 1 month before, Herzl would, on this date, 125 years ago, receive 500 copies of Der Judenstaat in his apartment in Vienna. Now, what is the book all about? Well, I would say that if we have 8 minutes, there are 2 points. The reconceptualization of Judaism as a national and not only religious identity. And secondly, it was a call for Jewish activism and agency. And I want to illustrate those 2 ideas, each with a line from the Jewish state. In the introduction, right at the beginning, Herzl said, "I consider the Jewish question neither a social nor a religious one. It is a national question." And he concluded the book with the sentence, "The Maccabees will rise again," in which he alluded to the Maccabees, heroes of Hanukkah, to their activism, which he and later Bialik would contrast with the passivity of the waiting for the Messiah, as opposed to the self-help program of Herzl's Jewish state. Why did he write the book? Well, one of the reasons was the same reason for which he penned The New Ghetto. He was disappointed with the emancipation and its achievements. And the second was the rising of anti-Semitism and his great awareness of this, a new kind of anti-Semitism of a non-religious type, which was particularly palpable in his home city of Vienna, where Karl Lueger had just been elected as the mayor. Lueger was essentially, I would say, a forerunner of the Nazis. So what was the impact of the book published 125 years ago? Well, it wasn't so much because of its contents. It's a very, very dry read. There's a lot of economics, a good deal of law, and when he actually talks about some of his plan, his discussion of the class of passage for Jewish travelers to the Jewish state, would they go first class or second class? What would their housing arrangements be? And his discussion of the 7-hour workday and overtime pay, all very important issues, but none of them would make this book a bestseller. What was important was the item that Tove has already mentioned. Herzl put forward on the cover his academic degree. He wanted people to see that this was serious. It was not fiction, it was not drama, but it was a serious quasi-academic presentation, and he wanted to be taken seriously. In addition to that, there were a few more reasons. He succeeded in galvanizing some, but not all, of the already existing Zionist activists, particularly among the Chibat Zion movement, which had been founded in the previous decade. The book concretized with a very practical seeming plan the idea of creating a Jewish state and moving the Jewish people. And it was the details, even if they're not a lot of fun to read, but it was the details that made it very clear that this was not a utopian novel, but it was something to be read in a different way. Now, that's interesting and that's important, but it's not Jewish thought. But number 4 is a seminal idea. Herzl strived to change the discourse from seeking individual civil rights for equality for the individual Jewish citizen of Germany, of France, rather to a discourse and a striving for the attaining of national recognition for the entire people. And that was a major, major change. He reflects on this by repeating quite a few times in the book, we are a people, one people. I think, Richard, you quoted that as well. And lastly, I would say that it's interesting that Herzl addressed this to non-Jews as well as Jews. Of his 500 copies, he sent many to prominent political figures and leaders across Europe. And as you all know, of course, he had audiences with several important people in the following years. So it wasn't addressed only to the Jews. But it was translated into the Jewish languages, Hebrew and Yiddish. In fact, during the very first year after its publication, it was republished in 7 different languages, which is quite rapid. Amongst those who embraced his ideas most rapidly were student groups. The Jewish Fraternities Declaration, 4 months after his publication, said, "The revival of Jewish statehood has never been expressed in such a clear and forthright way as it has been in the recently published tract by Dr. Theodor Herzl." So there we've seen some of the ideas of how it came about, what's in it, and a bit of its impact. And I'd like to conclude by trying to say a couple of words, putting it into a historical context. Jews have thought about Jewish identity for thousands of years. In the upcoming holiday of Purim, we will see reflections of Judaism as peoplehood, as kinship, as family, as culture, and religion. I'm going to focus on the last couple of centuries and just 2 dates in addition to Herzl. In 1656, Baruch Spinoza was excommunicated by the Dutch community in Amsterdam, the Dutch Jewish community. His crime or his sin was heresy. From his writings, it seems that he rejected Judaism as a religion and the authority of the rabbis. Spinoza's idea was that one could be a Jew without practicing the Judaism as it had always been practiced. Now, Spinoza was not the first to do that. Many Jews had ceased to practice Judaism, But previously, one had to convert to Christianity or another religion. There was no man's land between religions. Spinoza said, I am not practicing Judaism, but I remain a Jew. Many in the 20th century and the 21st have seen Spinoza as the first modern or the first secular Jew. And his creed might have been summarized with the phrase, Judaism is not a religion. 100 years later, Moses Mendelssohn, writing in Germany, published a book called Jerusalem. And in it, he argued that the law of Judaism, halakha, ceremonial law, did not compete with state law. And therefore, Jews who observed Jewish law had no dual loyalty, and they could be good citizens of the countries which accorded them citizenship. In that way, he succeeded, he thought, in burning the candle at both ends, a good Jew and a good German. Similarly, but from a different direction, with the French Revolution and the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Man, when citizenship was offered to the Jews in France, religion was marginalized for the Jews and for others, and religion was relegated to the private sphere. The argument there was that Judaism is only our religion. We are Frenchmen of the Jewish religion. Our French citizenship has no problem with our religious identity, which is a private affair. So those were two of the ideas which had been articulated in the 2 centuries before Herzl. When Herzl came along and published The Jewish State, he would say, Judaism is not just a religion, rather, Judaism is a national identity. As I have often said to my students, my non-Jewish students, Herzl might say to you, I am a Jew not the way you are a Christian. I'm a Jew the way you're an American or an Englishman or woman or a Canadian. I'm a Jew by my national identity. It's the passport I carry rather than the prayer book which I use. And so that's Herzl's contribution, I think, in the context of some Jewish thinkers who have preceded him in the previous centuries. I hope that I've been able to put some context to the publication. Thank you very much, and I look forward to Einat and Avraham.
Thank you, Ophir. That was fascinating. And we're going to move on to our next speaker, who often needs no introduction. He's my mentor, Avraham Infeld. Avraham is the founder of Melitz, the Centers for Jewish Zionist Education. And Avraham has served in so many influential positions in the Jewish world, including Birthright, Hillel International, the Shalom Hartman Institute, and many others. So Avraham, will you please join us?
Now you can hear me, I think.
Yeah, we can't see you though. Okay, there you are. Good.
The manifesto ends. The Maccabeans will rise again. The Jews wish to have a state, and they shall have one. We shall live as free men in our own soul and die peacefully in our own homes. We will be freed by our liberty, enriched by our wealth, magnified by our greatness, and everything we achieve will be for the good of humanity. What an amazing ending to, frankly, a pretty boring manifesto. And somehow that ending and the enthusiasm that it created, and as both previous speakers have said, his use of the term very clearly, wir sein ein Volk, we are a people, put that concept of being a people into the center of the discussion of how to deal with the Jewish problem in Europe. I was told that I only had 10 minutes to speak. I've never managed to do that, but I will try today. And therefore, I asked myself 3 questions in preparing my thoughts. What did this pamphlet, as he called it, achieve? The majority of Jewish children born in the world today are born into a Jewish state. Despite the fact that he was aghast, absolutely aghast at the idea of everyone ever asking for directions in Hebrew, the majority of the Jews in the world are able to converse in Hebrew. Jews no longer need to resort to influence. The Jewish people have power. Despite his comments about finding a large enough territory for the Jewish state anywhere in the world, be it in Argentina or be it in Palestine or elsewhere, he in no way connected it to the land of Israel. The story of modern Zionism eventually linked to the more ancient dream of a return to Zion with all the problems that that entailed. I have often said that if Herzl brought about a revolution in Jewish life, maybe we should have gone to Uganda. What we did reminds me somewhat of the of the child who gets mad at his parents, packs his bags, throws them over his back, goes to the door, slams the door, and stays inside. That's what the Jews, in trying to fulfill this Jewish state and connecting it to the land of Israel, created for us immense problems. Thank God. The kinds of problems that we, thank God, are able to deal with. Of what is it that makes the state tick? All of these things happened despite the fact that he was not committed to dealing with any of them. Zionism from Herzl moved within 7 years from a Zionism which had a flag of 7 stars representing 7 work hours during the day, to a blue and white flag representing the prayer shawl in the synagogue. We became a Jewish state with an anthem reacting to 2,000 years of yearning. That's what became the Jewish people's anthem. What is superb about Herzl's book, The Jewish State, was its publication, its adding the words Wir sein ein Volk center into the Jewish discussion, and creating an organization that was flexible to allow Jews of all kinds to impact what would eventually become Zionism. It would not have happened without him. And therefore, I doff my hat to Herzl, and I strongly criticize those people who criticize Herzl in so many places today. The second question I ask myself, where did it fail? There's hardly a mention in the manifesto of what will the relationship be between the Jews who live in that Jewish state and the Jews around the rest of the world. And we, to this very day, have failed to deal properly with that subject. I am a very, very strong advocate of Jewish peoplehood. I'm very often criticized that Jewish peoplehood does not fit all the conditions of Zionism, but it's not true. Jewish peoplehood recognizes that what Herzl was trying to do was not to try to turn the Jews into a nation, but to recognize that we are one people, and that if we are to remain a people, we cannot do that without a state in which we are free, in which we are sovereign, and in which we have control of our own lives. I then asked myself a third question. What important lessons or warnings that do appear in the manifesto did we choose not to heed? I wanted to talk about two of them, although there were several more. The one was the relationship to religion, the relationship to the temple. Avoid theocracy at all costs. Show respect for the religion of our past faith. Let it unite us, but it is knowledge that gives us freedom. Keep our priests in the confines of their temples in the same way that we shall keep the commanders of our voluntary army to the confines of their barracks. He spoke about two issues that could endanger the state. The one of having an army that is too powerful and whose commanders become too involved in the running of the state. And the second issue, beware the rabbis. Have great respect for people and let the members of this Jewish state be free in their belief and also free in their disbelief. These are issues which we are facing here today, each and every day, because we do not heed Herzl's comments on this issue. My involvement in Jewish peoplehood, which constantly talks about we are one people, we are not a religion, would not be understood in a world in which Herzl had not previously published this manifesto. For that, I am deeply, deeply grateful to him. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Avram. Wow, you really did it in 10 minutes, huh? Terrific.
9.
Nine, right. And now to our last presenter, Dr. Einat Wilf. Dr. Wilf is a former member of the Israeli parliament and a leading thinker on matters of foreign policy, economics, Israel, the Jewish world, and Zionism. She's the author of 6 books that explore key issues confronting Israeli society. Einat?
Thank you so much, and thank you to the very interesting previous speakers. Zionism, Herzl, and politics. The interesting thing is that if Herzl were to come and see Israel's political life and political system today, he would certainly not recognize what he imagined, but he would very much recognize what he built, meaning that in Der Judenstaat, Herzl, of course, was a snob. He imagined building a Vienna on the Mediterranean. One of the reasons that his book is so full of descriptions of how the new country of the Jews will be, really will be the emblem of progress. All the new ideas of the time were ideas that he put in his book in terms of how you build a just society and a good economy and a proper workforce. And he constantly emphasizes how the country that will be run according to the principles of science and rationality. I mean, in that sense, the book very much reflects a utopian moment at the end of the 19th century about the ability of science and rationality to create the good society. And Herzl very much in his desire to show the Jews that if they were to build a new state, it would be just as good as the states that they already live in. In the context, as was mentioned, that Herzl writes his book as a result of the disappointment of emancipation. He wants to tell the Jews, we can build our own. This is almost a classic Jewish play. You know, we're kicked out of this university, we're kicked out of this club. Well, we're going to build a good university, a good hospital, a good club, which will be the envy of others. This is literally Herzl's play here. He's telling non-Jews, you know what? you claim that we're part of you, but you don't really behave this way. So you know what? We're going to go build on our own something that is going to be as good as what you have, if not better. And in that sense, Herzl is very much the Viennese snob, and his book reflects it. As a result, the politics he imagines, of course, are the politics of snobs. He calls it a Republican aristocracy. You can see the disdain he has for democracy and the fact that everyone has a voice. I mean, he talks about the importance of that, but ultimately he throws his lot with what he calls an aristocratic republic. And we need to remember that at the time of writing, democracy is viewed as a danger to the Jews. When the mayor of Vienna is elected, the anti-Semitic mayor, Karl Lueger, who had tremendous influence on Herzl's development, the amazing thing is that for his election to take forth, the Kaiser of the empire needs to approve it. The Austro-Hungarian Empire is still in force then. He has to approve it. And he repeatedly rejects it. And the people repeatedly elect him. So you have, Herzl is literally living through this battle between the Kaiser, so the aristocracy, the world of kind of aristocrats, which he experiences as the protector of Jews, versus the rise of populist democracy, which he experiences as a danger to Jews. And he is absolutely correct, and also where it will lead in the next few decades. So therefore, what he imagines for the Jewish people is some kind, he calls it an aristocratic republic. He doesn't go into too much details, but we know also from diaries that he imagined himself crowning his son as the king of this aristocratic republic. So in that sense, you know, when people now try to describe that, you know, democracy is essential as part of Zionism, it definitely was not in Herzl's imagination. And at the moment where he lived, certainly democracy seemed to hold a lot of danger. But, so I'm saying that he wouldn't recognize in Israeli politics the aristocratic republic that he imagined, but he would definitely recognize what he built, because the political institution that he built, rather than the one that he imagined, was the emblem of democracy, and it is the Zionist Congress. The Zionist Congress at the end of the 19th century is one of the most advanced democratic bodies in the world. By the second convention, women vote at about the same time as New Zealand, the first country to do so, and everyone has a voice. And the reason is, of course, that Herzl has one of the most remarkable combinations of being a snob and then being insanely pragmatic. So, for example, when Herzl writes Der Judenstaat, he really hopes and believes that those who will find Zionism appealing are the Jews of the West, of Germany, of England, of France. He believes that they, just like him, he views himself as an assimilated Jew of the West, an advanced, a secular Jew. And like the Jews of the West, he shares contempt for the Jews of the East, the Jews of the shtetl. And he believes that Zionism will appeal to the Jews of the West, that they, like him, will realize that emancipation is a sham, that it was a false promise, and that they will become Zionists. Of course, fairly quickly, he realizes that it's not the point, that's not happening. And who actually likes his vision? The Jews that he had contempt for, the Jews of the shtetl, the Jews of the East. Amazingly, rather than go home and say, okay, if the Jews of the West will not adopt Zionism, I have no interest because it doesn't fit my aristocratic vision for this Vienna on the Mediterranean, he embraces pragmatically and ultimately ideologically and wholeheartedly the Jews of the East. And by the time he writes Alt Neuland, he even he elevates them. And he says, he almost throws the Jews of the West to say they don't get it. And it's the Jews of the East who get it. And he says they will be the new aristocracy. Ultimately, they will be the ones who will become the leaders and the aristocrats of the new countries. So Herzl has this truly unique combination of these kind of snobby aristocratic leanings, but ultimately he's very pragmatic in his implementation. So in his book, he speaks of an aristocratic republic, but when he goes to establish the first political body, he establishes one of the most democratic bodies in the world at the time. He pragmatically understands that Zionism at the end of the 19th century is a very marginal movement in the Jewish world, and that the last thing that Zionists can afford to do is to reject people. So Zionism and the first Zionist Congress basically embraces essentially anyone who wants in. So what the Zionist Congress becomes a very democratic body where literally anyone who wants in is in. No one gets rejected. And the Israeli Knesset is a direct continuation of the Zionist Congress. The Israeli Knesset basically continues the same structure of very democratic, high level of representation where everyone has a voice. And of course, the amazing thing about the Israeli Knesset is that it took the structure, the democratic, highly representative structure of the Zionist Congress, and extended it to the two populations who were not exactly fans of Herzl, Israel's Arab citizens and Israel's Haredis. Both of them entered the Israeli Knesset, which was a direct continuation politically of the various Zionist congresses and their political structure. So Herzl would very much recognize in Israeli politics, in the Knesset, he would recognize the Congress. Moreover, he would recognize the dynamics of the Congress. In his book, he describes wisdom, rationality that will govern the new body. He talks about wise men making the rules according to the understanding of science. He talks against factionalism. He talks about how people will not be emotional but civil. But of course, none of that characterizes the discussions in the Zionist Congress. And of course, the irony is that Herzl becomes a victim of that. When he brings in the Sixth Zionist Congress the idea of Uganda as a temporary shelter, he is basically outvoted. Ultimately, after a lot of negotiations, his proposal is accepted, but fundamentally, he's forced to change under the force of the majority. So the political body that he established where everyone has a voice, within a few short years, it didn't take 30 years, it took 4, 5, 6 years for the body to basically turn against him, to prove itself intensely democratic and not at all this aristocratic republic that bows to Herzl as supposedly the Jewish king. So I think the amazing thing is that Herzl would not recognize in Israeli politics what he wrote and what he imagined, but he would very much recognize in Israeli politics what he built and what he personally experienced.
Great, thank you very much, Einat. We have a few questions that I may throw out to you, since all of you were very disciplined and stayed within your time frame. So we have a few more minutes, and someone asked a question that may, Robert Friedman asked, the translation of Herzl's book from the German is wrong. It's not the Jewish state, but rather the state of the Jews. Would be great if someone can address this mistranslation. Any one of our presenters? Is Avraham there? Einat, do you want to take a shot at it since you're still on my
Sure. I
screen?
mean, it's something that I've consulted with many people about this. And it also goes to Ophir's comment and to Avraham's comments. At the time when it was published, there would have been no distinction. People would have understood it as the same thing. The Jewish state, the state of the Jews. Today, we make a whole debate out of it. But at the time, people would have understood it as one and the same. The French state, the state of Frenchmen. I mean, because the whole emphasis was on Judaism as a national identity, when Herzl writes it, he means Judenstaat, like the French state, the German state, the English state. So in that sense, for those reading at the time, the distinction would not have made sense, which is why you don't have debates at the time. It's just today with the translations, we've made it into kind of a debate, because does it mean that the Jewish state has to have Jewish values, or does it have to have Jewish numbers? But it's not a concept that would have made a lot of sense at the time. So, and that's
and that, I think that what really provokes the question today is that there is a distinction. Can you hear me? Is that there is a distinction if the word Jewish means religion.
oh yeah.
Then you are talking about, is this a state of the Jews, or is this a Jewish state where the word Jewish links us to religion? The Judenstaat that he used, you were quite correct in saying, meant both the state of the Jews and a Jewish state, when being Jewish is a nationalism, a peoplehood. It is not a religion, and he makes that quite clear. So I think that that's important to underline. I was told that we were going to be asked a question about what would we do if
You will be asked that question. in
Okay,
just
so I'll
one
wait for that.
But go
Maybe
ahead,
I'll add one more thing. I have this talk where I discuss this question of what do we say when we call Israel the Jewish state? And I end the talk by saying that my ultimate definition of the Jewish state, and one that I personally experienced in the Knesset, is that the Jewish state is the one state in the world where we argue about what it means to be the Jewish state. And I think this is precisely what Herzl experienced in building the Zionist Congress. Jews will be Jews. And from the beginning, the Zionist movement was defined by intense argumentation over what exactly this Jewish state is going to be and what it means and how Jewish and in which way.
Today, when we launched our campaign, which appeared in Yediot, which is one of the largest circulated newspapers in Israel, there was a cartoon that had Herzl up in heaven looking down and saying, wait, I want to take a look. It says, Rega, rega, lo kacha. Okay, wait a minute, it's not supposed to be like this. So to summarize and conclude our program, we wanted to pose the following question to all of you. With everything you know today, if Herzl asked you for your input, what advice would you give him? Avraham, you were waiting for that question, so I'm going to ask you to go first.
What I would like to do is I would like to take Herzl for a tour to certain places which would raise some very interesting questions. He really shows in his Jewish state a disdain for the ghetto Jew. I would take him therefore on Thursday night to see ghetto Jews being bribed by a bowl of cholent in order to be vaccinated, according to the science that Herzl so seriously believed in. I would take him to see the strong debates over the question of public transportation going on in Israel on Shabbat. I would take him to see that what the move he made within the 7 years between the publication of the book and the 6th or the 7th Congress were amazing years, because they took two master stories of the Jewish people and blended them together. The one was the dream for a return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. We are being punished by God living in the ghetto. When we are forgiven, we'll go back to that land. And that the land of Israel, therefore, is the fulfillment of God's promise to return us. And the second story is the story of modern Zionism, saying, I am going to become just like you, non-Jews. You have an anthem, you have a flag, you have a state. That's what I'm going to do. You have a Supreme Court, and to me, the Supreme Court is going to be central as well. And look, your move in 7 years has created an amazingly interesting, exciting, and sometimes difficult life for us in Israel.
Ophir, you want to
Sure.
tackle that question?
Well, I'm going to ask Herzl a very different question. Not necessarily better, but I think equally important. In the book, Herzl gives a lot of attention to the relations between the Jews and the Christian neighbors as the Jews migrate out of Europe. How will they do so slowly, giving the Christian economy time to deal with the absence of the Jews? A lot of attention. Quite a few pages are dealt with that. But as everyone knows, he gives no attention to the immigration of the Jews and the neighbors that they will acquire when they move here. And of course, that's one of the biggest questions confronting the state of Israel today. What is our relationship with, he wouldn't have called them Palestinians, he might have called them Arabs, maybe he would have called them citizens of the Ottoman Empire, but he gives no attention to that. He does, of course, have his utopian picture in Alt-Neuland, but things didn't work out according to the utopia. So I would love to hear Dr. Herzl express his opinions on that situation here, because it's one of the biggest problems that we do have facing us.
Einat?
Well, one of the things that I've always admired about Herzl, and I think generally doesn't get enough credit, is his action. I mean, there's a lot of emphasis on the book. In Israel, he's called Chozeh Medina, the visionary. But he's not just the visionary, he's the founder. He literally, within a few short years, which puts every entrepreneur to shame, within a few short years, he lays the foundation for a modern state, from the political representation to the economic structures. I mean, it's all there. And I think that's quite remarkable. And a lot of people are not sufficiently aware, and the way we teach about Herzl, in this combination between the visionary and between the founder, the person who actually put it all into motion. And amazingly, also, I could not even give him the advice to have a greater sense of urgency, because one of the reasons he died young is that, amazingly, still at the end of the 19th century, he is possessed by a sense of urgency that this has to happen. So even that is not advice to give him. And on the question of his blind spots, which were clear, whether it is about the Arab world, and you know, he didn't really anticipate yet the end of the imperial era, so he thought it would be under empires that the new state would be established. But I think those blind spots were almost essential. He needed not to see certain things in order to be able to believe in it. And then we're left to deal with it. But I think part of his success and his ability to move things forward is that he didn't look at what will fail him. He didn't look at all the problems that were going to be. And to the extent that he looked at them, he kind of washed them away with these utopian ideas about the fact that they will be solved. So I think for me, the most amazing things is that he put everything into motion. I can't even say that there's anything he could have done more. He was possessed by a sense of urgency, which is amazing when you think of the moment where most Jews thought that they were living the life. And ultimately, yes, he did not realize a lot of the challenges that ultimately were the challenges of Zionism were the challenges that he didn't see. But in some ways, I think that it's good that he didn't see them. I mean, all of us needed to be a little blind in order to succeed.
Herzl himself in the book says several times that it's only thanks to his blindness that he wrote the book. Had he done his research in advance, he wouldn't have written the book, and where would we be?
Exactly.
You know, there's a wonderful story that says that Herzl lived diametrically opposite, in Vienna, diametrically opposite Freud. And the question has to be asked, what would have happened if one Sunday morning they met and Herzl would have said to Freud, I have a dream. We would probably not have a state today.
I believe there's a letter that we have in the Zionist archives from Freud that Freud sent to Herzl.
Yeah, later.
I think,
Yeah.
right. That we can probably pull up for you. Anyway, we have to end this evening and or day for those of you who are in North America. And I want to thank our amazing speakers for taking the time to be with us. And thank you once again to our friends at AZM, to the American Zionist Movement, to the Zionist Federation in the UK for joining us here at the Herzl Center in Jerusalem for this special occasion. And for those of you who want to hang on for 5 more minutes, we have a short video produced by our young educational staff and narrated by Miri Weissman, a new Ola from New Jersey and one of our team members. I also want to say that we are slowly reopening the museum and the site after being on lockdown for a while, and we hopefully will have people traveling again this summer. So for all of you around the world, please come and visit us. And you can, in the meantime, follow us on our website and on our Facebook page, Instagram, all the various platforms we have on social media. And we also intend on doing these kinds of programs for the next few months before the summer as well. So thank you for being with us, and thank you to our speakers.
Yishar koach tovas.
Thank you.
Thank
Toda.
you.
Toda.
Einat tov lirot otach.
גם אותך, אברהם. ונעים להכיר ירדן.
נעים להכיר.
גם לי.
On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared the establishment of the State of Israel, while behind him hung a portrait of Theodor Herzl between 2 Israeli flags. In his speech, he credited Herzl as the founder of the Jewish state. In the first moment of Israeli history, the Prime Minister felt it necessary to thank a European journalist who had died 44 years before. What was so special about Herzl was that he defied all odds. All Herzl had was the power of his idea. He believed that if the Jewish people were to have a state of their own, anti-Semitism, which was becoming increasingly prevalent at the time, would cease to exist. Herzl theorized that if he could get the Jewish European philanthropists to support him, then the Jewish people would be soon to follow. So Herzl set off to meet with Baron Hirsch, one of the richest men in the world at the time. He pitched his idea by reading a 22-page pamphlet detailing the Jewish state. However, after only 6, he was laughed out of the room. It just didn't seem plausible. However, Herzl didn't give up. He edited his pamphlet, entitled it An Appeal to the Rothschilds, who were the most affluent Jewish family in Europe, but he never managed to secure a meeting with them. It was actually his father, Yaakov Herzl, that suggested he publish his pamphlet to the Jewish mass. After all, it was the public he was trying to convince, and they would be the ones to make the move anyway. So Herzl underwent another round of editing and published it today on February 14th, 1896, with a new title, The Jewish State. This was a shocking title, for nothing of this notion had ever been mentioned before. It almost implied fantasy, but Herzl was quick to challenge in his preface, saying that it was no utopia or fantasy, rather those who will it will have it. Am I stating what is not yet the case? Am I before my time? Are the sufferings of the Jewish people not yet grave enough? We shall see. It depends on the Jews themselves whether this political pamphlet remains for the present a political romance. If the present generation is too dull to understand it rightly, a future, finer, and a better generation will arise to understand it. The Jews who wish for a state shall have it, and they will deserve to have it. In the introduction, Herzl claims that being Jewish does not only mean that one practices Judaism, but also that one is physically part of a Jewish race. A Jew is a Jew, whether he likes it or not. Choosing to identify as a non-Jew is pointless. We are a people, one people. Thus, whether we like it or not, we are now, and shall henceforth remain, a historic group with unmistakable characteristics common to us all. We are one people. Our enemies have made us one without our consent, as repeatedly happens in history. Distress binds us together, and thus united, we suddenly discover our strength. Yes, we are strong enough to form a state, and indeed, a model state. He goes on to discuss how assimilation will never work. In vain are we loyal patriots. In vain do we strive to increase the fame of our native land in science and art, or her wealth by trade and commerce. In countries where we have lived for centuries, we are still cried down as strangers. It is useless, therefore, for us to be loyal patriots. If we could only be left in peace, but I think we shall not be left in peace. In Chapter 2, he discusses why previous attempts have failed, causes and effects of anti-Semitism, and his plan. Although Herzl was not opposed to establishing a Jewish state elsewhere, he writes that Palestine is our ever-memorable historic home, and a Jewish state in Israel would be most fitting after 18 centuries of Jewish suffering. Chapter 3 provides an in-depth detail and is titled The Jewish Company. It deals with purchase of land, building, commerce, methods of raising capital, and more. Chapter 3 includes Herzl's famous concept of a 7-hour day, which was that everyone takes a shift working for 7 hours a day. This way, work is being done around the clock. Chapter 4 is titled Local Groups and discusses emigration in stages by community. Every group will have its rabbi, traveling with his congregation. Our rabbis, on whom we especially call, will devote their energies to the service of our idea and will inspire their congregations by preaching it from the pulpit. They will not need to address special meetings for this purpose, and appeals such as this may be uttered in the synagogue. And thus it must be done, for we feel our historic affinity only through the faith of our fathers. He then prophesies that our Jewish customs will be more vibrant in Israel, for we will no longer be influenced by our non-Jewish surroundings. For these habits are the thousands of fine delicate threads which together make up an unbreakable rope. When we journey out of Egypt again, we shall not leave the flesh pots behind. Every man will find his customs again in the local groups, but they will be better, more beautiful, and more agreeable than before. The fifth and final chapter is titled The Society of the Jews, which will act as a body of representatives to the whole world. He discusses the constitution, language, laws, army, flag, and more. It is in this section that modern-day Israel differs the most from Herzl's vision. Hebrew being the national language, the power of the Israeli Defense Force, the limited separation between church and state, the Israeli flag, are the most dissimilar to what Herzl detailed in Chapter 5. In his conclusion, Herzl offers rebuttals to the arguments he expects to receive and ends on a high note. The Maccabeans will rise again. Let me repeat once more my opening words. The Jews who wish for a state will have it. We shall live at last as free men on our own soil and die peacefully in our own homes. The world will be freed by our liberty, enriched by our wealth, magnified by our greatness, and whatever we attempt there to accomplish for our own welfare will react powerfully and beneficially for the good of humanity. These last few sentences about the universal benefit of a Jewish state were woven onto his coffin drape when he was reburied in Jerusalem on Har Herzl, where I stand today, after the establishment of the state. Herzl never got to see the actualization of his dream, and for that, we must never stop acknowledging his legacy of selflessness and valor. This is what Ben-Gurion was trying to convey in his speech on May 14, 1948. When the state was taking her first breaths, she remembered the man and the book that wrote her into existence.
So thanks again, everyone. Have a good night from Jerusalem and see you soon. Toda, shalom.